Chapter 12. Tyler wasn't sure whether disappointment or relief filled him more when the limo stopped. He didn't know what he'd been thinking talking to Laney about his ranch like that, almost like he was inviting her out when he knew he couldn't. But there was something about Laney, something open and friendly that made him think of home and want to spill his secrets. He almost had when she teased him about his jaw. But she wasn't one of the contestants. She was his makeup artist, and they paid her to hang out with him. He would do well to remember that. Perhaps that was the difference. He felt more comfortable around her because there was no pressure. He didn't have to think about giving her a hat or sending her home. He didn't have to try to imagine her fitting in his life back home. But he could. He could see her riding out with him to check the horses and then watching the sun set across the creek. He could see her sitting on his wraparound porch when he built one, drinking coffee with him and talking about the day. But he needed to get those thoughts out of his mind. Laney wasn't a contestant, and he had 7 women waiting for him that were. The door opened, and Tyler stepped out first, holding out a hand to help Laney without thinking about it. She placed her hand in his, and his fingers tingled at her touch. How long had it been since a woman had made him tingle with only a touch? Too long, but that didn't matter. He needed to stop thinking about Laney and start thinking about the other women on this date. "Do I need a touch-up?" he asked when she stood beside him. "Nope, you look good." "How do I look?" Her fingers reached for the bump on her head, but he caught her hand before she could touch it. "You look fine. Just a little bump, but don't mess with it." Her eyes dropped to their clasped hands before returning to his. Okay. He dropped her hand. He shouldn't have been holding it in the first place. "Let's go ride some horses then." Tyler led the way to the beach where the guide was waiting, with 10 horses. As Tyler did a mental count, he realized Laney wouldn't be riding with them today, and he wondered why they had sent her then. He hoped she wouldn't get too bored waiting for the group to return. The women hadn't arrived yet, but he could see a limo pulling up behind the one he and Laney had ridden in. He glanced around for Laney, but she was standing several yards away and staring out at the ocean. He wondered what she was thinking, but only briefly as the women's voices reached him. "Horses? Is he serious?" "Put on your game face, Jess. It's too early to go home." "Yeah, but horses are so smelly and gross." Tyler couldn't tell which women had spoken as they approached in a group, but they obviously didn't know their voices would carry. While he wasn't sure who the second woman was, she had called the first one Jess, and the only Jess had to be Jessica, who had just earned herself a ticket home. Any woman who didn't like horses would never make it on his ranch. He put on a smile as they approached. "Welcome, ladies. As you know, I live on a ranch. I spend most of my day on horseback, and while my wife wouldn't have to ride with me every day, I want a woman who is comfortable riding, so we're going to go for a ride down the beach." "Awesome," Cassidy said. "I have always wanted to do this." A few other women nodded their assent, but he noticed Jessica and Melody kept quiet. Melody must have been the other voice he heard. While he wouldn't cut her right now, he would keep his eye on her as he wasn't sure she was here for the same reason he was. "Pick a horse, ladies, and our guide here will get you set up. Except for you, Jessica. You can go back to the house and pack your bags." Jessica's mouth fell open, and several other jaws followed suit. "What do you mean? I'm excited to ride." Her voice rose into a shrill pitch, and her eyes darted to Melody as if asking for backup. "Actually, you're not. Any woman who thinks horses are smelly and gross won't fit in my life. I'm not sure why you're here, and I'm sure you'll make a great wife to some man someday, but it won't be me." "But She looked around at the other women, but none were willing to back her up. She turned to Mary Ann, who was the closest thing to a producer in the area. "Can he do that? Just send me home?" Mary Ann looked as if she were holding back a smile. "He can indeed." But fine." She spat the word at Tyler. "I didn't want to live on a ranch anyway. I came on this show to grow my Instagram followers, and I'm sure I'll do that." She turned to Melody, venom flowing from her eyes. "Just so you know, Melody isn't here for you either. She's promoting her brand." "That's not true." Melody lunged for Jessica, who jumped out of the way but continued to taunt her. "Yes, it is. Ask her about her channel." Tyler shook his head and stepped forward. He could not believe this nonsense, though he probably should have known there would be women coming on the show for their own chance at fame. That's enough. Both of you can head back to the limo. I'm sure the driver will be glad to take you home to pack. Melody stopped attacking Jessica to turn sugary sweet eyes on Tyler. There's no reason to send me home too. She's making up that story because I didn't lie for her. That may be, Tyler said, but I'm not a fan of your behavior just now either. I'm looking for a woman who shows grace and composure in all circumstances. So again, you both can go now. Good luck. Melody narrowed her eyes at him as if she were going to say more, but finally she whirled around and stalked off, leaving Jessica to stumble after her. Well, now that the excitement is over, who's up for a ride? The 5 remaining women cheered and picked out their horses. Tyler looked around for Laney and nodded as she flashed him a small smile. He didn't need her approval, but getting it felt right. Has that ever happened before? Laney asked as soon as Marianne shut the door behind them. They had dropped off the footage to Peter and Justin, stopped by the kitchen for some ice for Laney's head, and then hightailed it to Marianne's bungalow to discuss and relax before dinner. No, but that was great. Peter is probably going to be angry because those two would have caused drama. And drama is good for ratings, but man, it was nice to see Tyler put them in their place. Marianne collapsed onto the sofa and sighed. Right? Laney sat down sideways in the chair, putting her back against one arm and throwing her legs over the other. She placed the ice bag on her head and tried not to grimace. I worked with women like Melody a lot in New York. It was so tiring listening to them complain about everything and never being able to tell them to knock it off. You don't know how many times I practiced drawing a scab or some hideous birthmark on their headshots. Marianne's eyes widened. You did no such thing. Okay, I didn't. I never even saw their headshots, but I thought about it. Her face reminded me of Mr. Cuthbert's in high school. Remember that day when you showed him the petition? Laney's free hand flew to her mouth as the memory came back to her. He was so mad. I think he would have kept me from graduating if he could have found a way. Laney had never been a fan of injustice, and she fought hard for things she considered unfair. When the principal had shut down their new stage her senior year because someone graffitied the exit sign, Laney had typed up a petition and gathered signatures from the students. Then she had taken the petition to the district office. The woman in charge there had sent her back to Mr. Cuthbert, but she must have called and said something to him, because when Laney, Marianne, and Jennifer, their other friend, had arrived, he had been fuming. What was it he said? Marianne asked. Her face scrunched in thought, but Laney didn't have to try to remember. His words were forever imprinted on her mind. You went above my head, she started. Marianne's eyes snapped open and she finished the statement with Laney. To a woman? He was such a jerk, Marianne said, shaking her head. Yeah, but he taught me strength and the importance of standing up for what you believe in. I think I'd kind of forgotten that over the last few years. Thank you for reminding me. Laney thought back over the months she had worked for Madame Bonovich and realized she was just as bad as Mr. Cuthbert had been, if not worse. And yet Laney had taken her abuse day after day. How had she let the opinion of one boy who had never noticed her and who she'd probably never see again influence her life so profoundly? I'm really glad we reconnected, Marianne said. I didn't think I missed any of you, but now that you're here, I realize I do. I've missed you and the rest of the group. Maybe when this show is over, we should try to get the gang together. Laney was just about to agree when a knock sounded at the door. She looked to Marianne, who shrugged and crossed to the door and opened it. Marianne, have you seen Laney? I need to talk to her. Peter's voice sounded almost frantic, and Laney stood as Marianne stepped back. His eyes took in Laney, and he hurried over to her. Oh, good. You're here. I need to talk to you. I know we were only going to have you do Tyler's makeup, but I just watched the footage from today, and the women need some help. Can you please do their makeup as well for the rest of the show? Laney bit her lip as she thought about what to say. The logical part of her wanted to say yes, of course she could. That was her job after all. But the emotional part of her wasn't sure she could handle making the women even more beautiful. Even though she knew he was off limits and she had no idea if he was even interested in her, there was this crazy part of her that felt like she was competing for Tyler too, and making the contestants more beautiful would just push her farther down the ladder. In the end, her logical side won out and she nodded. Sure, Peter, I'd be happy to. Just let me know when, and remember I need 10 to 15 minutes per woman, plus Tyler. Great. I'll add it to the production schedule. We'll make sure we have enough time before the next date. Thank you, Laney. You are a lifesaver. As he hurried out of the room, Laney sank back down in the chair. What had she just agreed to?